Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, we appreciate your testimony today. It's always a wonderful dialogue to talk about these issues around the globe, and this committee has an important role to ensure that we scrutinize funding and that we're spending American dollars wisely. As I'm sure you know, many of our constituents are worried about that fact. And so I guess I have maybe to wrap things up here, more of a global question for you. The request is $46.2 billion. And I think my constituents, as all of ours do, have questions related to what exactly our foreign policy is today. As I'm sure you're aware, as every administration, this administration comes under some criticism for its foreign policy. And I wanted to maybe give you a chance to respond to some of the concerns that are out there that I hear from my constituents that I'm sure you have heard from as well. And I guess I'd start with a little bit of an undercurrent of what was Ronald Reagan's foreign policy of peace through strength, that weakness invites aggression. And I'd like to highlight a few concerns that have been raised by constituents and others throughout the country, certainly in Syria, where there's feeling that we painted ourselves into a corner and we allowed Russia to become a major player in the resolution there. Concerns related to the Iranian sanctions relief and whether we are being essentially played by Iran throughout this whole process. Lingering issues related to the murder of our ambassador in Benghazi. Certainly today, the Russian invasion into Ukraine, Russia sailing a ship into a harbor in Cuba, a spy ship 90 miles off of the American border. Some people see this as a retreat, and that you spoke, I think, very passionately about a vacuum that occurs in the world if the United States doesn't play a significant role. And so I guess I'd like to ask you, we're familiar with what the Bush Doctrine was. We're familiar with what other presidents' foreign policy is. How would you categorize American foreign policy today in comparison to previous administrations and in relation to some of the concerns that have been brought up across the country? And then specifically, I might just ask, do you feel that the reset of relations with Putin has been effective? Do you think that the removal of missile defense from Eastern Europe unilaterally, was that concession useful, and would we feel that that was smart given today's relation with Russia? And then how do you look at this in context with the reduction in military spending under the President's budget, particularly given the administration's belief that government spending is critical to stimulus in the economy and that austerity is bad? Why austerity just in the military and really nowhere else at this point? And what message does that send in your role as Secretary of State as we reduce military spending to pre-World War II levels? And essentially, what is in relation to all those issues, what is the American foreign policy as you see it? And then finally, if you have a second, speak to the Iranian sanctions issue.
Okay, we'll do that in 2 minutes or 10? Right.
As much time as you can. The chair would allot.
Look, I love it, and I'm delighted to have a chance to talk about those things because there's a narrative out there that I think is completely without any basis, and I love the opportunity of defending, not just defending, but of making clear what the President's priorities are and what our policy is. Quite simply put, we are making America stronger at home and abroad, and making America safer by projecting American economic interests, as well as by standing up for and projecting our values, which also support our interests, and by taking on terror before it comes to our shores. And we are fighting terrorism in many, many different venues, in many different ways, and that's a longer conversation. But let me go specifically to this juxtaposition with, let's say, Russia or reset or whatever you want to call it. The reset with Russia was not just the pushing of a button and saying, oh, everything's going to be terrific. The reset was an effort to find those things we could cooperate on, understanding, of course, that with Russia we were going to have major philosophical and other kinds of interest differences. So we have been able to find cooperation in important things. Afghanistan, on nuclear weapons, the START reduction, on the CW program in Syria, And I might say, Madam Chairman, when you asked me in the very beginning of this hearing about the time frame on that, the time frame originally in the agreement is till June. We are 30% out now. 30% is being moved out, and we are now on a 65-day program, which I believe could be reduced to 35 days. And we're pushing very hard with OPCW and others to get it out. So I want to take advantage of making that question. But in addition to CW with Syria, Iran, P5+1. Russia has been an important cooperative partner in the effort to get the agreement that we got. Now, you mentioned that agreement and said, are we being played by Iran? Please. We are seeing Iran's 20% uranium enrichment reduced to 0. We are seeing Iran frozen in its 3.5% level of uranium stockpile. No new centrifuges have been put in place except for a replacement. No additional numbers over the number that we began with when we began 2 months ago. We have seen inspectors go into Fort Howe. We had no inspectors at all in Fort Howe. We have inspectors at Natanz. We didn't have them there. We have inspectors not as frequently as the other two, but sufficiently in Iraq, in the plutonium reactor. They are not able to complete the plutonium reactor. We have cradle-to-grave tracking of production. We have the right to go into their storage facilities for centrifuges. In effect, Iran's program is being rolled back from where it was. And there is no way to draw any other conclusion but that the world, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, the region, are safer because of that first step agreement that's been put in place. Now, we're not sitting here and telling you automatically Iran is going to make the judgment to conclude the deal. I can't tell you that. President Obama and I share serious reservations about whether or not they will, in fact, make the hard choices that they need to in order to satisfy the world fully and completely that this is a peaceful program. So, but the bottom line is we are putting that to test and earning the credibility of the world to know that if they don't, and we had to do something else, we will have exhausted every possibility to prove to the world that we were willing to put them to that test. I think these are very important things in the conduct of foreign policy and in the potential of the use of force or any choices that you have to make. So we're not being played. We're doing what good diplomacy requires. And we've done it in a way that expands the so-called breakout time from what was about 2 months to significantly more, and it could grow. And if we can get a final agreement, it will be even larger. So I just don't buy this notion. I don't think that, I don't want to get into, particularly 2 days before I'm about to sit down with Lavrov, but I think Russia has challenges of its own, and I'm not sure that they need to have the kind of economic constraints that may be following depending on the decisions they make. But I also want to say at the same time, we recognize Russia has interests in Crimea. You know, Ukraine was part of Russia for centuries. Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine. He came from Ukraine, but there are other reasons that he did it. And the Russian religion comes from the eastern part of Ukraine. There are battles for Russia's freedom that were fought in the eastern Ukraine. There's a long linkage there. And we need to approach this in ways that we get Russia to be able to respect the sovereignty of a country, the integrity of international law, the rights of Ukrainian people to make decisions for themselves, even as Russian speakers and Russia's interests can be appropriately met. That's really the challenge here. And I don't think that the United States, I think the United States is playing a critical role in helping to perhaps bring that about. And I can tell you all over the world, my friend, I'll tell you right now, we are playing a critical role with respect to North Korea. We're playing a critical role with respect to the relationship between China Japan, Republic of Korea, and the Republic of Korea and Japan were central to our engagement with ASEAN, to maintaining stability and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. We are engaged deeply in the Middle East, obviously with Syria, with Iran, with the Middle East peace process, with Egypt, with the others. We're engaged in the Maghreb. We're helping Tunisia. We're working on Libya. I just came from a conference where we're working with Libya for its hopeful stability, and laid out a plan with more than 40 other nations in order to be able to help Libya. We are working on the transition in Afghanistan. I negotiated with Karzai that BSA. He's not seeking to change the BSA, but he is refusing to sign it until or unless there is some effort on the peace process, which we don't control. Each of the candidates for president of Afghanistan have said they will sign it. So I believe it will be signed. And I believe the United States is in Africa, where we have a young leadership program. We're engaged with Power Africa, where Russ Feingold just helped negotiate a special envoy, a disarming of M23, and an effort in the Great Lakes, where we've been involved in helping to provide for a ceasefire / semi-truce in South Sudan, where we are engaged with the Arctic and the Arctic nations. We'll be assuming that chairmanship in a year. I can run a long list of economic things, just alone. And TTIP, the Trans-Atlantic Trade Investment Partnership, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, take 40% each of them, the world's economies, and put them into a system of trading, which will benefit Americans and create jobs in every state in our country. That's what we're getting for this penny on the dollar, folks, and I've only begun to scratch the surface. So I thank you for the opportunity to. I'd be happy to give you a longer answer when the light's not flashing and I'm not abusing everybody else.
Secretary Kerry, thank you for your time today. Thank you for the energy and the passion that you put into the job that you do. We appreciate it very much. This concludes today's hearing, and members may submit any additional questions for the record. The Subcommittee on State, Foreign Operations, and Related Programs stands adjourned.
I'm a young Venezuelan trying to seek a better future. And I thank you for mentioning this in this committee. I just want to ask you, how can we help you help us?